hope he can make a deal. As to Stephen Miller, to my colleagues who believe that you can convince Donald Trump that Stephen Miller is a liability for him, good luck with that. When this clock strikes 12 on the Trump era, there'll be a few people walking out the door with Donald Trump. Stephen Miller will be in that group. So I want everybody to know on the Republican side that Stephen Miller is not the problem. Sanctuary cities is the problem.
Trump isn't just sweating, he's spiraling. One day, his DHS chief points the finger at Stephen Miller. Miller fires back and hints a protocol breach. And suddenly, the inner circle is in walkout mode, eating itself on live TV. Then Katie Miller goes nuclear on a GOP senator, and the senator hits back with receipts about leaks and betrayal. While that chaos explodes, Trump's club is partying through the invasion, and polls and the dollar are both in freefall. This isn't politics, it's a meltdown, a cover-up, a collapse of power with democracy and truth on the line. And what gets exposed next will shock you.
And China will be sending me a bill very shortly supporting year-round E-15 to my desk very quickly, and I will sign it without delay, okay? I hope you remember.
We are evaluating why the CBP team may not have been following that protocol. Okay, stop right there. Because that one sentence in this account is the sound of a system trying to do two things at the same time: protect itself and explain itself. And when a government starts talking like that in public, you're not watching confidence, you're watching stress fractures. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to translate what this transcript is claiming in plain English, keep the line between stated and suggested crystal clear, and show you why the internal finger-pointing matters more than the gossip. Because the story being presented here isn't just Trump's people are fighting. The deeper issue is whether power is being used with accountability, or whether the whole machine is being trained to dodge responsibility, rewrite the narrative, and move on as if ordinary people don't count. Now, the transcript opens with a blunt premise. It says, Donald Trump is losing it, and that senior officials in his administration are turning on each other in public. It immediately ties that claim to something much more serious, a fatal shooting in Minneapolis. In this telling, the person killed is identified as a VA nurse named Alex Prey, and the shooter is described as Border Patrol agents. The transcript uses the word murdered and even throws in inflammatory language like Gestapo. I'm not going to mirror that rhetoric as fact, but I am going to stick to what the transcript says happened. There was a deadly shooting, federal agents are implicated in this account, and now high-level figures are publicly blaming each other for how it was handled and how it was described.
But nobody knows when they saw the gun, how they saw the gun, everything else. Bottom line, it was terrible. Both of them were terrible. The other was terrible, too. And I'm not sure about his parents, but I know her parents were big Trump fans. Makes me feel bad anyway. But, I mean, I guess you could say even worse. They were tremendous Trump people, Trump fans. And, you know, the daughter was, she was, I don't know if you could say radicalized, maybe not. I don't know. But I hate to see it.
And that's where the flipping idea actually lives here. Not courtroom cooperation, not plea deals, nothing like that is shown. What we're watching, as presented, is public fracture. One official says, "That wasn't my call." Another says, "That wasn't my information." And suddenly the story becomes a shield everyone is trying to grab at once. The first move in this transcript is about blame assignment. It says the DHS secretary, named here as Kristi Noem, blamed White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller for giving her a script with false claims about the person who was killed. The narrator asserts she was widely condemned, then claims she responded by saying she was just reading his words. On the other side, Miller is described as rejecting that framing and pointing toward Border Patrol and someone named Greg Bovino as the source of bad information on the ground in Minneapolis. So, in plain English, this account is painting a picture where messaging was either reckless, sloppy, or knowingly misleading, and now the people at the top are trying to pin the consequences on someone else. Then comes the line that changes the temperature. The transcript says Miller told CNN that officials are evaluating whether Customs and Border Protection agents in Minneapolis failed to follow proper protocol before the fatal shooting. It also quotes Miller saying the White House had given clear guidance to DHS about how extra personnel sent for force protection should be used, not to conduct arrests themselves, but to create a physical barrier between arrest teams and disruptors. And again, that key quote, "We are evaluating why the CBP team may not have been following that protocol." If accurate, that's not small. It's an attempt, in public, to establish a rule set after someone has died. And it also signals something else. They're already building the argument for where responsibility belongs. Notice how this works as a mechanism. If you claim protocol existed, you get to imply the problem wasn't leadership, it was execution. If you say clear guidance was provided, you get to suggest the center did its job and the failure happened at the edges. That's not a verdict, it's a political and legal posture. And it's a classic one. But this transcript doesn't leave it at bureaucratic phrasing. It says Miller also claimed he passed along information he received from people on site, which functions as a second layer of insulation. I didn't invent it, I relayed it. Put those together and you get an accountability maze. The script came from someone else, the intel came from someone else, the operational decisions came from someone else. The outcome is tragic, and everyone is holding a map that points away from themselves.
Well, Mr. President, with the current value of the dollar, do you think it's declined too much?
No, I think it's great. I mean, the value of the dollar, look at the business we're doing. No, dollar's doing great.
You want to see it decline?
You know, it's very interesting. If you look at China and Japan, I used to fight like hell with them because they always wanted to devalue their yen. You know that? The yen and the yuan. And they'd always want to devalue it. They devalue. And I said, not fair that you devalue because it's hard to compete when they devalue. But they always fought, no, our dollar's very good.
Then the story veers into a personal political brawl that the transcript treats as part of the same collapse. It says Katie Miller, identified as Stephen Miller's wife, attacked a Florida state senator, Ilana Garcia, claiming Garcia was fired during Trump's first term at DHS for not showing up to work. The transcript says Garcia had called for Stephen Miller to be fired and urged the administration to stop ICE and Border Patrol invasions of cities, warning immigration policy would cost Republicans in the midterms. It also references a New York Times description that calls Garcia a Latinas for Trump co-founder and says she called the fatal shooting abhorrent. Then Garcia's response, as quoted here, turns the knife in a different way. She says, "Invite me on your podcast and let's talk candidly about how you once labeled your then boyfriend, meaning Stephen Miller, a racist when you were upset, and how you described Garcia as a token Hispanic for the administration." She also alludes to White House leaks and undermining then-Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen. Now, I'm going to be careful. That exchange is presented as a quote, but we're not shown underlying evidence for those personal claims inside this transcript. What we can safely say is that the transcript is highlighting public infighting that drags spouses, reputations, and old resentments into the open, at the exact moment the administration is under pressure for a deadly incident. And that's the point. When an administration can't keep its message disciplined after a death, you don't just get chaos, you get the incentives exposed. Everyone scrambles to control the story because the story is where accountability either lands or evaporates. The transcript then snaps to something designed to feel grotesque by contrast. It describes a party at Mar-a-Lago happening while, in the narrator's framing, the country is reeling from the killing. It says guests were greeted by women in showgirl outfits, people drank champagne by the pool, and entertainers floated in giant bubbles while spreading their legs. It adds a social media commentary line that calls them eyes wide shut parties, referencing a furry party weeks earlier.
It shows how hard it is to clean up, even after you close it. It shows the price that we paid under Joe Biden.
It's the hardest thing when you think of it. You know, inflation we've solved. It's done. We have it good where prices are coming way down. They were just saying in Iowa, the fuel is $1.95. Did you hear that? Somebody said $1.85, but it was $3.50, $4.50 just a year and a half ago. You look at eggs, you look at groceries, it's all down. Everything's come down. Do you notice they don't mention affordability anymore? That's like an old-fashioned word. They brought up affordability.
Again, I'm not adding to that. I'm just telling you what this transcript chooses to emphasize. It's using imagery, indulgence, spectacle, detachment, to argue that the center of power is insulated from consequences. Whether every detail is accurate isn't something we can confirm from what's pasted here, but the rhetorical purpose is obvious. It's saying, "Look who gets to party while others bleed." Then we get another piece of institutional theater, Lindsey Graham, described as defending Stephen Miller on TV. The quoted segment says Graham basically tells colleagues, "If you think you can convince Trump that Miller is a liability, good luck, because when the clock strikes 12 on the Trump era, a small group will walk out the door with Trump, and Miller is one of them." He then pivots to saying, "Sanctuary cities are the problem, not Miller." That's a pattern. Change the subject from what went wrong to who the enemy is. Redirect scrutiny away from internal decisions and toward an external villain. In politics, it's effective. In governance, it's corrosive, because it trains the system to treat oversight as hostility. Next, the transcript piles on indicators of collapse using statistics and signals. It claims the US dollar is tumbling to a fresh 4-year low. It says Trump's overall approval is 38%, immigration approval is 39%, and it asserts that a majority believes ICE operations have gone too far and need to stop immediately. It goes even further and says most Americans believe that ICE should be abolished. Those are specific numbers and broad public opinion claims, and we're not shown the underlying polls in what we have here. So if you're listening with a skeptical ear, treat those as the narrator's assertions, not independently proven facts. The broader point the transcript is trying to make is that the administration is under visible public pressure, economic anxiety, legitimacy anxiety, and political vulnerability, all at once. That combination tends to intensify the incentive to control narratives rather than confront reality. Then the transcript moves into a sequence about Trump's public remarks. It says he gave a speech in Iowa and claimed, "China will be sending me a bill very shortly to sign," framing it as confusion, as if he thinks China is Congress. The transcript also claims he confused Iceland with Greenland while talking about wanting to invade Greenland, and it calls the idea insane. We're not given the full context of those statements beyond the snippets described. But the script's aim is to depict erratic leadership and a widening gap between confident performance and competent governance.
Secretary Kristi Noem must resign or face impeachment. I don't know.
Oh my God. Oh my God, he's sprayed something on her.
I need a napkin to know nothing.
Here's what she told CNN afterwards. Let's play this clip.
Representative Omar, are you okay?
You know, I'm gonna go figure if I am, but I feel okay. I feel that it is important for people, whether they are in elected office or not, to allow these people to intimidate us, to make us not fight for our constituents and for the country we love. And as I said, you know, I've survived war, and I'm definitely going to survive intimidation and whatever these people think they can throw at me, because I'm built that way.
Thank you.
And then comes another quoted moment meant to feel chilling. The transcript says, Trump, speaking about 2 deaths, one being Alex Prey in Minneapolis and another person named Renee Good, said he felt even worse about the second one because her parents were big Trump fans. The included quote has Trump saying it makes him feel bad anyway, then suggesting maybe radicalized, maybe not, and saying he hates to see it. Here's why that lands, emotionally, even without adding any extra facts. It implies a value system where grief is filtered through loyalty. Not a person died, but were they on my side? That's not a policy dispute. That's a worldview problem. Then the transcript shows Trump being asked about the dollar's value and responding, "I think it's great," and launching into a comment about China and Japan devaluing their currencies. Immediately after, it claims he tells people inflation is solved, prices are coming way down, fuel in Iowa is $1.95 or $1.85, and that groceries and eggs are down. Again, we're not provided external price data in this text, but the shape of the argument is recognizable. When people feel squeezed, leaders often declare victory anyway, and sometimes the declaration is aimed less at truth than at dominance. Now the transcript pivots to something even more volatile. It claims Trump's words continue to incite violence, and it mentions him attacking Ilhan Omar on social media with accusations. Then it describes an incident at a town hall. It says a Trump supporter attacked Omar, lunged with a syringe, and sprayed her with an unknown substance. It references video and then includes a quoted clip of Omar afterward, saying she feels okay, that intimidation won't stop her, and that she's survived war and will survive this. I want to draw a clean line here. The transcript alleges a specific violent act and implies a political causal chain. We can't verify that chain from what's pasted here, but we can responsibly say, this transcript is raising the alarm about a climate where harassment and intimidation target public officials, and it is presenting Omar's response as defiant and civic-minded for our constituents and for the country we love. Then it claims state regime media tried to minimize the attack by calling it silly string. The included exchange shows someone saying it looked like silly string and suggesting not to overdo it. The transcript's point is about normalization. If every boundary crossing incident gets laughed off, the boundary disappears. And this is where the through line tightens, accountability versus intimidation. If the public gets trained to shrug, then power learns it can keep escalating. Not necessarily with tanks in the street, often with 1,000 little, it's not a big deal moments, until democracy becomes a performance instead of a practice. Finally, the transcript returns to the Minneapolis shooting with another claim designed to suggest a cover-up. It describes a woman who recorded the killing of Alex Prey, saying she has not been contacted by the FBI or anyone from the federal government, only state investigators. The quoted exchange has her saying nope to federal outreach, noting she has a legal team, and expressing no, absolute no, confidence in a federal investigation. She also claims investigators weren't allowed to come to the crime scene and that their goal is to protect themselves and to spin stories. That's an accusation, and a serious one, but it's her stated view as presented here, not an adjudicated finding. Still, even as an allegation, it matters because it reveals what public trust looks like when federal power is perceived as self-protective. Trust doesn't vanish all at once. It leaks out, drip by drip, until people start assuming institutions exist to cover for themselves, not to serve the public.
Just got a notice from Ilhan Omar, who just posted actually a short time ago, saying that she's a survivor and not going to let this agitator interrupt her, and she'll continue doing her work. So it's unknown what that substance is, but apparently she is okay tonight. Craig?
Well, we're glad about that. Let's not overdo it there. Ilhan Omar, she's a survivor. It looked to me like silly string, which we used to play with back in the day. Well, Joe Moeller, we appreciate it. Thank you.
And then, in the last seconds, the transcript tacks on another topic. It says Trump's DOJ made a filing before judges in the Southern District of New York and claimed they won't impose time limits on themselves, that they'll produce documents when they want, and that they're redacting millions of documents. It mentions Epstein files and says the narrator will do a separate video. We're not shown the filing. We're not shown the docket. So we can't evaluate it beyond saying the transcript alleges delay and broad redaction on a sensitive matter, framed as part of a larger pattern of control and concealment. So what does all of this mean in plain English? It means the transcript is describing an administration under pressure that responds with 3 moves. 1, diffuse responsibility. It was the script, it was the intel, it was the agents, it was the protocol. Everyone points to the next layer down. 2, flood the zone with conflict. Spouses, senators, old grudges, talk shows, intra-MAGA attacks, a noise storm that makes it harder for the public to track the central question. What happened? Who authorized what? And what safeguards failed? 3, minimize the human cost, either by shifting attention to parties and spectacle, or by reducing threats and attacks to jokes, or by reframing tragedy through loyalty. And if you've watched democracies slide, that pattern should look familiar. Not because it's inevitable, it isn't, but because it's tempting. When accountability feels dangerous to people in power, narrative control becomes the substitute. Here's the part people miss. A democracy doesn't just break when someone announces they're a dictator. It breaks when institutions stop insisting on clear answers. It breaks when evaluate protocol becomes a way to avoid naming responsibility. It breaks when public servants treat the truth as optional and the consequences as someone else's problem. And that's why the internal fighting matters. Because in this transcript, the infighting isn't a sign of conscience, it's a sign of fear. Fear of being the one left holding the bag when the story hardens into reality. Now, if you want to be fair, you also have to hold 2 things at once. First, this transcript is a narrative. It's built to persuade. It uses loaded words, dramatic contrasts, and selective emphasis.
Been contacted by anyone from the federal government? FBI?
No, I have
Border
not.
Patrol, Homeland Security?
I do have a legal team now who are fielding much of that, and I am no longer accessible in those ways.
I talked to your attorney this morning. She said she had not received any outreach from the FBI or anybody from the federal government.
I do not think they have my name yet. Obviously, they will.
You've given testimony to state investigators.
Yes.
Do you have confidence in a federal investigation?
No. No, I do not. I have faith in various representatives throughout our country who are trying to do the right thing and make sure that justice is served. I have faith in our local government in Minnesota. I think they are wanting to make sure to protect us and investigate it thoroughly, but they are trying to block that from happening. They wouldn't even let the investigative team come to the crime scene. I mean, their goal is to protect themselves and to spin stories.
It's incredible to me, though, that 4 days after this shooting, you have not been contacted by anybody from the FBI or the federal government. Right. What does that tell you?
That they're protecting themselves and they don't care about the truth of what.
Second, even within a persuasive narrative, the shape of the conduct it describes can still be alarming. Deadly incidents tied to federal action, public officials scrambling to assign blame, political allies redirecting scrutiny, and public trust fraying around investigations. If the facts are as severe as this transcript suggests, oversight becomes urgent. If the facts are less severe, then the reason the narrative spreads becomes its own warning sign. People believe institutions won't tell the truth unless forced. Either way, the civic danger is the same. When leadership treats accountability as an attack, the public learns to treat governance as a con. And once that takes root, everything becomes brittle. Courts, elections, public safety, economic stability, basic legitimacy. So let's land this with the clearest possible line. In this transcript, the administration isn't portrayed as calmly confronting a tragedy and cooperating with transparent investigation. It's portrayed as rearranging blame, escalating feuds, and managing perception, while ordinary people are left to wonder who is actually protecting them. That is not strength. That's a power reflex. And democracies survive power reflexes only when institutions, and the public, refuse to accept fog as an answer.